All right, good afternoon, everybody. We'll get started here. First off, just a quick housekeeping thing. For those students who are in attendance today, if your professors asked you to attend or offering any extra credit or anything like that, there's a sign-in sheet on that back table right there. Just put your name and which class it is, and that way you'll get credit and people know you're here. We have an excellent opportunity today. We have a wonderful guest speaker. She spoke this morning at 9 a.m. over in the Stouffer Lounge, and it was a big success. We're lucky she's actually going to be speaking now at noon and then again at 3 p.m. today. And each of the presentations is actually a little bit different. So come and punch your card 3 times, and you don't win a prize, but you do get to see Dr. Consalvo 3 times, which is a prize in and of itself. So if you guys have any questions, please do feel free to ask them. This should definitely be a dialogue, so please do participate and feel free to ask any questions you have. This is part of the regular speaker series from the Institute for New Media Studies. This is sponsored, we're very grateful, by the Provost Office, as well as the Department of Communication Studies and our friends at the library. Dr. Consalvo is Professor and Canada Research Chair in Game Studies and Design, which has got to be one of the coolest job titles there is, at Concordia University in Montreal. She is the co-editor of Sports Video Games and author of Cheating, Gaining Advantage in Video Games. She has most recently completed the book Players and Their Pets with Jason Beggy, and is now finishing Japan's Video Games, a book about Japan's influence on the video game industry and game culture. Dr. Consalvo runs the M Lab, a space dedicated to developing innovative methods for studying games and game players. She's presented her work at professional as well as academic conferences, including regular presentations at the Game Developers Conference. She is the president of the Digital Games Research Association and has held positions at MIT, Ohio University, Chubu University in Japan, and the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. So with that, a big round of applause as we introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Mia.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me here. This talk will be completely different from the morning. So for those of you who are attending again, there's new stuff involved. This is some older and newer material that I've been working on for a little while. And Gordon mentioned the Game Developers Conference, which I normally go to. This is an annual meeting for professional game developers, and it's held every year in San Francisco, usually at the beginning of March. This year there were, I think, about 26,000 people who attended. And I've done some talks there. This year I was just a civilian. And I went to interesting sessions, and I don't know if it was sort of a growing theme this year, or it was like my unconscious bias leading me to lots of sessions about player choices and how and why people make choices, and for the developers themselves, how to make more interesting choices for players. And so just reflecting on the title of my talk, I think some of these dilemmas that players are thinking about or thinking through are, how do you make choices in games? Why do you make the choices that you do? And I want to kind of talk about those things and maybe just sort of contrast it in your mind. I'm not going to so much explicitly address it, but this idea of like it's just a game. A lot of times video games get dismissed that way. It doesn't really matter. It's just a game. Sometimes we're using it like in a positive sense, like, oh, don't worry about like playing games too much or the violence because it's just a game. Other times, people will say, oh, well, but you can't use like games for education. They're just games, like they don't mean anything. And I want to challenge that and say, actually games matter quite a bit for people in lots of different ways. So, a few of the things that I'll talk about, cheating will be the big one. I'm going to talk a little bit about moral and ethical dilemmas. And I'm going to talk about the structure of the magic circle. It's a concept in game studies that'll help us understand that. And also I'm going to talk about why the magic circle idea really isn't so great. And I'm going to talk about ludic and instrumental play. So this is going back to some of my earliest research when I got interested in studying players and why and how they played games. And one of the first things I was curious about was, what does it mean to cheat in a video game? And I don't even know if people have asked why were you interested in this, and I'm not even sure at this point, how I got curious about the topic. Maybe it was, it was my first job teaching after getting my PhD, and I think I'd had some plagiarism cases, and so maybe I was thinking about cheating in general. But it seemed like in academia cheating meant one thing, but in video games cheating meant something else. And so I was just like, well, what does that mean, cheating? And I thought about like trying to come up with a definition and seeing how players responded, but probably the smartest thing I did was say, no, I'm just going to ask players themselves. Like, how do you define cheating in a game? What do you do or not do, like, according to these principles? And that was probably the smartest decision I made. So I started asking people, what does cheating mean to you? Could you give me a definition? And pretty much everybody said at first, like, the one commonality was that cheating gives you some kind of unfair advantage in a game. That there's this idea of a level playing field, and somehow you have access to knowledge that nobody else does, technology, a skill, you can do something else, right? But that somehow you've tipped the tables, that not everybody has this, that you have it, right? But then once I said, well, okay, so what does that mean? Or, like, what would be an example of a cheating practice? Everything fell apart. Everybody's idea was different, in terms of like what was cheating or what wasn't cheating or what they did or didn't do. And, it was just incredibly messy. So at first I'm like, okay, what do I do with all this? And then it seemed, sort of looking through all of the answers, that some commonalities started to emerge. And so to kind of give you a sense of like where people landed, in terms of like how they define cheating. Like, there's more of a spectrum than anything else, so not discrete categories. But like at one end you have the purist. And I did have somebody tell me that anything other than getting through a game all on your own, like the knowledge inside your head, would be cheating. So I'm like, okay, so using like a cheat code, that would be cheating? They're like, yeah. I was like, so looking up the answer online, they're like, yeah. I'm like, asking a friend or like your brother or sister for help, they're like, yeah. I'm like, okay, wow, that's like really narrow. But for this person, and I should say also that for these people as well, you can cheat in a single player game. It's not just that there has to be another person involved, but that even if nobody knows, even if nothing else is affected, like you're playing solitaire and you cheated it, that's still cheating behavior, okay? So there aren't many people way down here at this end of the spectrum, but there are a few. Then you kind of move along, and people start talking about, well, like, asking your friends that's okay, right? Looking up the answer online, that's probably all right, and again, single player, multiplayer, it doesn't really matter. But where for some people cheating really becomes cheating is when you start messing with the code of a game. So you're finding a hack or a code or a bot, or something like that, that suddenly it's breaking like the code boundary of the game itself, and you're fiddling and changing the game. That's where suddenly things change. So people talked about also, like, if there's this kind of cheating, like if you win using a code, it's sort of hollow. In game studies, Espen Arseth writes about like the epiphany that you get when you're playing a tough game. Like, let's say you're trying to solve a puzzle in a game and you keep trying and you keep trying, or you're fighting a boss that has like really difficult tactics to figure out, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's the pattern, or like that's how you do it. That's like the epiphany that you have. People would say, like, if you just look up the answer, like you don't get that aha, you're just like, oh, there it is, and so you can get past it, but there's not that sense of accomplishment or achievement that you would have gotten if you figured it out on your own. So, if you're messing with these things, suddenly you're in the area of like a hollow win. And then at the other end of the spectrum is the cheater, and this is the person that most people tend to think about. And this person says, well, first of all, you can only cheat in a multiplayer game. There have to be other people involved, or else it doesn't really count. You can't cheat against a machine. And they like to say things like, I like to have any possible advantage against people, who don't necessarily want to play fair for me. This is the smallest group of people, which is reassuring. And some of them say other interesting things like, well, I've mastered the game. I've figured out every possible way to beat it. And so this is like a way for me to give myself a new challenge. Like, I'm going into the code to see what I can do, or I'm trying to like socially engineer people, like to see what I can get from them. Sometimes they say things like, well, in the game, everybody was cheating already. And so just to sort of make that fair playing field again, I have to cheat. But this is the person that in the multiplayer game is saying, you know, I will cheat. I will use all of these things. And I should distinguish, actually I'll get to that in a minute. So that's how people say, that's how they define cheating and what it is. And then I said, okay, so according to your own definitions, do you cheat? And the short answer is, everybody cheats at some point or another in a game. Why do they cheat? That's where it gets interesting again. The most common reason that people cheat is that they get stuck, right? So, you know, they've reached a level that they can't beat. There's that puzzle they can't figure out. Something, maybe the game is broken. You know, there's a bug. Maybe the game is just too hard. Sometimes they're trying a new type of game, and it's just like for example, they're really good at action games, but this is a real-time strategy game, and they don't understand the conventions. And it's not like a book or a movie where, you know, things are happening and you're like, oh, I didn't really get that, but like the movie keeps going and you can turn to someone and go, what's going on? You know, if you can't figure out what to do in a game, it just stops. And so players would say, well, you know, I reached this point where it was either I had to cheat or I had to stop playing the game. There was just no way forward otherwise. And people really don't want to do this. You know, they really look at cheating as a last resort. The second major reason why people cheat is that they said it was sometimes just fun to play God. This happened a lot even in single player games. And they would say, you know, I want all the good stuff, right? Like, I don't want to have to go through and earn my way, like people would say. Now, in the racing game, you know, like you start the game with like a little Subaru, and then you get like a slightly nicer car and a nicer car, and they're like, I want the Corvette, I want the Lamborghini. You know, the game makes you, it gates your progress, and you have to slowly unlock these things. You know, I just want it all right away. I want all the good guns. I want all the fun stuff. I want all the content. And oftentimes they would even couch this and say, well, but I'd already played the game through all the way once on my own, so I felt like I had earned that. These curious people always talk about cheating these very loaded terms. Like they think, you think it's a bad thing, and so they have to justify their behaviors, you know, even here. But, you know, there's a sense of sometimes like, it's just a playful thing. If the getting stuck is more instrumental, you know, like I need help, this is ludic. It's a playful cheat. Sometimes people would say, well, the game got boring, or it got really long, and I just wanted to see how it ended. You know, people would say this often in relation to role-playing games that have a lot of content, and they just wanted to kind of skip forward and see, you know, how things wound up. And you can think of this in relation to like reading a novel, maybe a mystery. You're kind of bored with it, but you still want to know what happens, so you flip to the back page and you just read kind of how things turned out. That's what happens here. Where this also happens is with online games like MMOs, like World of Warcraft, where you have a lot of grinding activities. You have to do things over and over and over to either earn experience or money in the game. And people would say, you know, I like the game, but I don't want to spend 40 hours doing this. I have a job, I have a life, I have friends. I don't want to do these kinds of things. I just want to jump past that part to get to what I think is the good stuff. And then the fourth reason is to be a jerk. And don't Google to be an ass with image search on Google. It's bad. But I mentioned, you know, the cheater and how they cheat and why they cheat. I should say it's to be a jerk, but also to gain strategic advantage. If they just want to be a jerk to other people, that's called griefing. And there are people that's what they do. You know, they go into games and their main objective in the game is just to make your life in the game miserable. Like that's what makes them happy. We call them trolls. But to be, you know, a cheater and to be a jerk, you may enjoy making other people feel bad, but you also want to get ahead as part of it. So those are the four main reasons that people cheat in games. And I mentioned the ludic and instrumental. So, you know, playing God I mentioned is ludic, it's playful. Being a jerk can sometimes be playful. Fast forward, you want to get past content. But also it kind of shows up in both. It can be instrumental as well. And got stuck is very instrumental. So that was early work that I had done on cheating. And when I wrote that book, it came out in 2007. And in game studies time, that's like, I don't know, Pleistocene era or something. You know, this is when the Xbox was just coming out. You know, people were talking about like console games that like nobody had heard of Facebook games. Nobody had like a phone that they played anything other than maybe like Snake on or possibly Solitaire. There was no iPhone with an app store, right? You used to get magazines in the mail that had tips and hints and stuff, like Electronic Gaming Monthly or Next Gen. So it's like, it was a different era. So the early work set, you know, I kind of concluded players are an active, thoughtful, and diverse group, accepting and resisting various forms of guidance, help, and cheats. Their activity indicates the complexity of the experience, which constantly challenges the fixity of a magic circle in play. So the magic circle, and I mentioned this was a concept, and I just love that book cover, because they were just having way too much fun playing that video game. So I started taking the research a little further, and this idea of the magic circle that I mentioned, it's one of the earliest concepts that game studies research has kind of clung to. Johann Huizinga wrote about play in the 1930s. Obviously, he did not know about video games, so he was not writing about them. But he said that play permeates culture. He actually said that play predates culture. It was a curious claim. But he mentioned the magic circle, which is this boundary where the normal rules of life do not apply. And the best example to give is usually the boxing ring. So, you know, we step into a ring, it's kind of, you know, square like this, and I can punch somebody in the face in front of a crowd of people, and everybody will cheer for me, right? And I can keep punching until that person falls to the ground. If I step outside and I start punching somebody in the face, people will call the police. The magic circle is at work. There is a boundary separating, you know, the normal rules of life from like the rules of the game. So game studies work said, you know, the magic circle applies to video games. You know, this is a helpful way to understand games. But then we started thinking, well, you know, it may be useful, but it's also got some issues or some problems associated with it. It's not like we always can completely step away from how we think about normal daily life. And this is just an example. There was a court case with Blizzard Entertainment, which makes World of Warcraft, against MDY Industries. They created a bot that went around and you would attach it to your character in the game and like set it up to run a certain loop and go to bed, and it would just run, and your character would run in this loop, and it would like kill anything that it encountered and pick up all of the items. It would also, I think, like if you found plants or things, like it would gather resources. So while you were sleeping, your character might have been leveling up, gathering things, you know, gaining more experience. And it was called the WoW Glider, if you're familiar with it. And Blizzard really didn't like this. You know, they said, or you're kind of cheapening the gameplay experience. You know, you're making money off our game. I think they started charging money for it, and so they took them to court. This is just the glider configuration. So things that you could set up the bot to do: movement, jump more, strafe. So the magic circle, I mentioned it's, you know, the boundaries of life don't apply, but actually in video games it's really hard to sort of think about where that boundary is or how strong that boundary might be. You know, in this game I mentioned the fast forward. People like to cheat because sometimes they don't like all that content, you know, like all the grinding that's involved. And along comes this person who makes this bot and says, oh, download my bot, use it, pay me for it. You can eliminate all of that boring content that you don't want to experience. Suddenly, the real rules of life, law, impinges on this magic circle of play. If you play games, you know sometimes if you're playing with other people, you encounter people with attitudes that are offensive to you. They say things, do things in the game, racist, sexist, classist things, homophobic things. Those things are not magically kept out of the game when we play. So even though we might think, you know, and there are certainly some things you can do in the game that you cannot do in daily life, those boundaries are not as brick and mortar as we might think. So really what we've got going here is a structural definition. That circle, it's in clash with the contextual, dynamic nature of gameplay. You know, you're playing with other people who have real opinions about things. So do you. people are engaged in different types of activities. And so again, currency exists, in the games. Now you can, some games encourage trading of like you can pay money to get virtual currency legally. Other games, there are illegal markets for that. There's competition, there's the grind. All of these things, these elements of daily life, you're playing a game and your friend comes over and they're like, what are you doing? And they're like, come over here, and you can't play anymore, and So I think people like the idea of the magic circle because it lets us say, well, it's just a game. It's not really life. Things are different in there. It doesn't really matter what I do in this game space because, it's just pretend. It's make-believe. But I don't think that really holds up. I think what we do in this space really matters. Maybe not a direct one-to-one mapping, but we are carrying through with this. So I mentioned I had done that research way back when, the early 2000s. And then things have changed a little bit in the video game world. And especially with the rise of social network games, or as you probably know them, Facebook games, I was suddenly curious, what's going on here? People are playing these games. Some people really don't like these games and like to say that they don't play them, but maybe secretly play them. They're playing on this platform with people like not just their friends, but their mother and their grandmother and their aunt and their grandfather. The games are kind of different. So how are people thinking about cheating in these spaces? Anyone here play a Facebook game? All right, yeah. One person admits to playing a Facebook game. At its heyday, 40% of Facebook's traffic was for playing games. So even if none of you are, people were playing. And this was also before Facebook really, the dominant user base kind of went mobile. So things have shifted yet again. But Facebook game. So how are people cheating or not? Or defining what cheating is in these types of games, right? So how does cheating apply potentially in a game like Castleville, which Zynga released a few years ago? So at first I just kind of looked at the structure of the games themselves and was like, like what would cheating even be? Like could you even cheat in these games? Like what about this idea of getting stuck? That seems so important for people. If you know anybody, since none of you do, who play these types of games, you may know that it's really hard to actually get stuck in many of these games. Most of them are so simple that they will pretty much lay out for you step by step. Like let's say there's a quest you have to do where, would you like to explore this land for, so you have to have so much castle level, you have to have built up your game space so much, so you've done that. Have 4 crystals, you have 1 of 4. You can buy them using real, like the game currency, or you can post to your friends and have so many coins, right? So it helpfully lays out for you, guiding you each step of the way exactly what you have to do. That's pretty hard to get stuff. Playing God, you want all the good stuff right away. There's actually a bot that people can use to download. They call them snag bars a lot of times, where it'll gather stuff for you while you play. These are illegal according to Zynga. Some people use them anyway. And a lot of people don't like to use them, mostly because they're afraid of viruses on their computers. There is a potential there, though, to play God. Fast forward, you want to get past the boring stuff. Facebook and social games have monetized this, so it's no longer cheating. It's just a normal part of gameplay. So you can skip selling a diamond for 5 crowns. Like let's say you don't have that diamond to sell it. And also, these games mostly are appointment-style gaming, so you have to keep coming back like every hour to do things. You only have so much energy available to you. But if you don't want to wait, well, you can just hand over $1, $2, or whatever, and do it right away. So this isn't even a kind of cheating anymore. It's just a normal aspect of play. And then I remember I mentioned every possible advantage. Most of the games that you can play, your progress does not affect anybody else in the game, right? Like, so you have a space where you build a world. I have a space, Gordon has a space. We can visit it, but we can't really affect it very much. Maybe I go to visit Gordon's world and I chop down a tree, but then when he goes in, he sees I've chopped down a tree, he can actually undo that action. So I can't even like virtually graffiti up his town. There's like no way to do that. Candy Crush Saga, I don't even know like how you would potentially do that. There was one game I found that actually lets you do this. It was called Fish World, where you had an aquarium full of fish. And like I could go to your aquarium and steal a fish from you. And if you logged into the game in the next 24 hours, it would say, hey, Mia stole your fish, and you had to come to my aquarium and get it back. Otherwise, it was gone forever. And there was no way you could like undo my stealing of your fish. But that was it. That was the only game, and I looked at hundreds of these games at the time. So every possible advantage really doesn't apply. So cheating, already you can see, like in social network games, it's a pretty different landscape from, you know, what you might think of as more traditional games. So how do the players themselves think about cheating? You know, are they still defining it the same way, or like, what are they doing? So I did a survey, people who play social network games. I did this with a couple of PhD students in 2012. We got people to do surveys, and then we did some in-depth interviews with a few people who were interested. You can see most people were adults in the 30 to 39-year-old range, and these were people who were pretty committed players of social games. So about half said they played more than once a day. And I'm just going to show you a few of the questions that we asked them and to respondents, and then I'll talk about what that means. So we asked, would you consider it cheating if someone convinced a friend or family member to play a Facebook game solely for the purpose of advancing gameplay? The vast majority, 93%, said, no, that's not cheating. Would you consider it cheating if someone added strangers solely to advance gameplay? 89.9%, again, pretty much the vast majority said no, but small uptick in people saying yes, like strangers, you know, slightly more problematic than friends and family. Have you ever logged into someone else's account to advance your own gameplay? About 20% said yes. Would you consider logging into someone else's account cheating? 50% said yes. So some people who say it's cheating are probably doing it. I would add, and I'll get back to this, this is in the context of Facebook. So you're logging into somebody's Facebook account. And you know, obviously that's against the terms of service for Facebook, but there's an interesting history of like how, especially family members, like parents and their kids, you know, negotiate Facebook and what that means. Would you consider it cheating if someone made additional accounts for the sole purpose of advancing gameplay? 40% said yes, you know, just making extra accounts, even though you can do it. Have you ever used cheat codes in a Facebook game? 93% said no, they don't want to mess with the code. Remember, the kind of middle-of-the-road person. And would you consider it cheating if someone were to use a cheat code to advance? 72% said yes. People really don't like messing with the code. Have you ever bought game currency or point cards to advance Facebook gameplay? Almost 40% said yes. This is the fast forward that I mentioned. And would you consider buying game currency or point cards to advance Facebook gameplay cheating? The vast majority said no. So this is already an interesting shift. You know, back when a fast forward meant like using a code or like illegal money purchase in a game like EverQuest, you know, they're buying stuff like buying gold is strongly condemned. Now you have a situation where the companies are actively saying you can purchase these things, and so people have said, nope, that's not cheating at all. And then finally, is cheating in a console or computer game different than cheating in a Facebook game? And about a third said yes. And this is a problem with surveys. We asked this question and we have some open-ended responses that we went through, but it's curious how people meant, how they were constructing console and computer game, it meant different things to different people. And I think it goes back to this morning I had mentioned, I had asked people like who plays games or who's a gamer, and lots of people said, oh, I don't play games, I'm not a gamer, but I play this or but I play that. And when you say computer game, people even mean different things. They're thinking about different things, which I can talk about in the Q&A. So let's move on. So Facebook itself, I think, structures how people think about their gameplay in certain ways. So the platform itself becomes important. You know, if you think about like an Xbox or a PlayStation, that's a platform that people play on. You're pretty much, you know that you're kind of dedicated to playing games if you purchase one of these things. You don't buy it like by accident. Maybe you bought a PS2 for the DVD player, but most people buy it to play games. And like if you're on Steam, if you have an account on Steam, you are pretty much using it to download games and maybe to chat with your friends who play games, right? It's kind of a dedicated thing. Facebook is totally different. Facebook is where you see like the baby pictures from the family member, or your friends post the pictures of your night out. All of these things are going on in relation to maybe playing games as well. Most people are playing with their real life profile. And this has implications then for what they do or don't do in the game, because it's being tied back to themselves. And also related to that, it's not just themselves, but it's like, Mom saw this, Aunt Clara saw this, my boyfriend saw this. All of that is suddenly tied back, and it makes people stop and think about what they do. It doesn't mean that they stop cheating, it just means that they think about it differently. So again, this kind of differs from something like World of Warcraft. Certain people there certainly do play with friends and family, but lots more people tend to play on their own or maybe with random groups of strangers. And there's a lot less tie back to, well, if I do something like cheating, people will think poorly of me. It's like, who will ever know, right? So knowing the people you're playing with really affects how you play the game. In the interviews, we asked people about this, and they would say, oh, well, I reconsidered my actions. Or I really thought about what I was doing. Some people said they could be less judgmental of their friends. They were like, oh, it's just this Facebook game that Charlie's playing, it doesn't really matter. Some of them were more judgmental. It often depended on who the person was and how they thought about them, but it really did matter. I mentioned, logging into an account. People tended to confuse like game rules and Facebook terms of service rules. They didn't really see them as different. And it's not surprising. Most people, like 1% of people, I think, read like EULAs and terms of service. And Facebook works so strongly to like kind of integrate everything together that it's hard to see how things might be separate. But the majority had never thought about the difference between TOS and game rules. Some indicated that such games force you to add strangers and act in ways that can violate Facebook terms of service. 58% said they wouldn't consider it cheating if someone made additional accounts. So, there's confusion there. They're so used to, how these things work, they're not really considering like the different platforms or rule sets that might be going on. I'm gonna skip past this. And then also, Facebook kind of helped set up a different sort of payment structure or normalize a payment structure. And this is sort of really tied to like the rise of Zynga free-to-play games and microtransactions. And so for this type of player, they expected games to be free. Think about like, do you ever log onto Facebook, see a game there that suddenly is, you have to pay money upfront to play. It's like almost unheard of. You expect these games for free, but then there's like kind of the built-in annoyance factor that you then maybe pay to get past, or maybe you pay for the luxury items. But it sort of normalizes, this way of playing. And so what that did was sort of get rid of this idea of buying things in games is bad. That used to be normal for people who played MMOs. So I think what's important to take away from this is that the platform that you play a game on matters. And it matters both for like, the technology that it's built on. Facebook is really good at asynchronous games that you play kind of not simultaneously, but also who you're playing with. Facebook, you may play a game with somebody on it, and then you stop playing, but you're still friends with that person. You still interact with them. You have this history in the past and going forward, and that means that your ties persist. Your reputation and how that person matters to you matters long before and after you play the game, and people take that into account. I mean, it seems obvious, but it is one thing that we found. And so that just leads up to cheating becoming defined relative to who's engaging in the action, not just what the action could be. So I'm going to skip past this and go to the second and newer part of the research. So I mentioned player choice and dilemmas. And one of the things that I've become more interested in are games that offer people moral dilemmas, you know, not like the do you kick the puppy or save the puppy, but you know, like in The Walking Dead, you know, you have the choice, do you save Carly or do you save Doug? Or, you know, like how do we react to Kenny when, you know, he's arguing with you? Or do you let the woman who's been infected by the zombie kill herself? Do you like hand her the gun? Or do you like say, no, you know, you can't do that? So those kinds of choices, games like, let's see, the Fallout series of games, you know, are really good at this. And also like Mass Effect, Dragon Age, basically any BioWare game that you're gonna play offers people, you know, all kinds of choices. Some of them, you know, they're well parodied. You know, sometimes it's just like, well, are you gonna be the sarcastic hero or the morally forthright hero? But sometimes they do offer people really complex situations, right? And I've become interested in like, how do people make choices? Which choices do they make? Like, if you can play evil or good, like, where do you line up and why? And this is just from Dragon Age. And the games themselves have gotten more complex, you know, in how they offer player these choices. So actually, just going back for a second, in the Dragon Age series of games that BioWare puts out, you know, you can do all kinds of different things. And it's not that the game itself says, like, you get evil points or good points, but like the party members that you have with you react to your choices. And some of your party members are renegades, and some of them are goody two-shoes, and some like structure and order, and others are thieves. And so how they react differs based on their own alignment. And so they can really disapprove or approve of what you're doing. And you know, like if you want them to stick around, you have to kind of treat them well, and things can kind of get in the way. So like you don't want to like piss off a character that you're trying to keep around. And also I mentioned the Walking Dead series put out by Telltale Games, and they do this cool thing where at the end of each episode of the game, it shows you each of the major choice points that the game offered you, and then an accounting of like, you know, it connects to the server and perennially updates, like you and 37% of players lied to Herschel. Who do you save, Duck or Sean? You and 47% chose Sean. So you can kind of see like where you line up relative to other people. And Telltale has kind of gotten this down to a science. They also do this with the Tales from the Borderland games, and they're doing Game of Thrones episodes now, and they're pretty much all like this. And players really love them, and there's lots of good discussion on their forums about like, why do you choose things? I'd also point out, I've seen them talk at the Game Developers Conference. They put a lot of thought into their choices, and they really don't want the choices to be like an obvious, like, oh, I need to do this, or oh, that's the good choice and this is the bad choice. So they'll go through and analyze, and if there's some choice that's really lopsided, like if you know the series in the first season, the Carly or Doug, which one do you save? Overwhelmingly, people chose to save Carly, and they were really curious about why, like what was it? And you know, at first they thought, well, you know, Carly presents herself as good with a gun, you know, so it's like, well, she's good to have around. She's better looking, you know, than Doug, so maybe people, you know, are saving like the pretty female character. And then they're like, well, those are just easy answers. And they went through again and they realized, like, up to that point, the player character, all of the interactions with Carly were about positive, moving forward things, whereas with Doug, it was more negative or neutral things. And so it just led you to have like sort of a less invested, you know, feeling about Doug. So the game developers themselves are like really thinking carefully about this stuff. So I mentioned, you know, like how do players play? And I started doing some interviews at first. Undergrad classes, I had students, we developed questions, they went out, they interviewed players, and I've since done more interviews with some grad students. We found more people. Long story short, most people like to play good. And I just saw another talk at GDC this year where they did a huge survey, and it was something like 90% of people play as good. So if you're worried about video games destroying the world, don't. People like to be good. They don't want to play the villain. But when we ask people why, you know, like how do you play, is all these fascinating differences emerge. So, like this one person said, I always seem to go good. I can go evil if I force myself to be evil. I really have to force myself to do it. It never comes naturally to me. You know, somebody else said, well, you know, I decided to, on this playthrough, I was going to play as evil, so I started making the evil choices, and then I stopped paying attention, and I started playing good again. It was like they couldn't even sort of like on autopilot, they just defaulted to good. And again, the game autopilot, I would naturally make good guy choices. You know, I had to stop doing this, and that kind of thing. So, you know, we asked people like, why are you doing this? Or like, what do you think is the reason behind it? And, you know, some people said, well, I like to be the hero. You know, I feel like this game is about becoming the hero to save the world, and of course the hero's good, so I would do that. Some people were very utilitarian and said, I want all of the game's content, and being evil doesn't mean being evil, it means being selfish. And selfish means not helping people, and so you are missing some of the game's content. So they basically wanted their money's worth out of the game. And let's see, I think there was a third group that was just, it was like, this is the way I was raised, right? So, you know, I'm just a good person and I can't help it, and I just even couldn't force myself to do it. And anecdotally, like, this is also the way that all of my friends are like, I can't do it, it just didn't work. You know, I tried playing Dragon Age, I think the first one I played 3 or 4 times, and you know, I tried going against the mages the last time and I just couldn't do it. Like, it made it, like, I couldn't even betray digital fictional characters. So I mentioned, you know, kind of this, you're a good person. You know, people said like, it's like a version of me that they were playing. You know, so it's not that I am my avatar, but it's kind of me a little bit. One person said, you know, in games like Dragon Age and Mass Effect, I create the way the character looks, what their backstory is like. They take on a lot of my own characteristics. So my relationship with them is very personal, as is my relationship with characters that interact with my character, as that becomes tied to my personality as well. You know, so for a lot of people, they're kind of playing as themselves, even if they're playing an elf or a dwarf, you know, in a fictional land where they have a sword and they're using magic. It's still kind of them. Like, they're reacting to choices on a gut level of like, what would I do? And it's hard for them to step outside of that. And I should say that for people who've played games a lot, most of what I'm talking about are people's first playthroughs of a game. Some people will play through a game 2 or 3 times. Things tend to change on their second or third playthrough, because then they want to experiment with what else might have happened, the different path, the different storyline, all of that. But these games tend to be very long and complex. A lot of people don't finish. And also for a lot of people, that first playthrough really tends to be the one that sticks with them the most. It's like that's their game, that's their story. So I tend to focus most on that first playthrough as like the one where these choices are coming out. So they're playing as them. Right. A fancy them, but as them. Sometimes they're also playing as like a better version of themselves. You know, so they're saying like, okay, yeah, I know it's not really me saving the universe, but like if this could be me, like in that situation, in the coming apocalypse, what would I do? And so they're kind of rehearsing their morality a bit, right? And even in that sense, then they want to be good. People do tend to get tired of good and bad choices and dichotomies. They really don't like it when games sort of push that obvious good-bad choice. And like this came up with the Mass Effect series, for example, where towards the end, you know, the games reward you for going one way or the other with special powers. Like if you stay in the middle, nothing much happens. And so they're like, well, I don't really get a choice because like I decided to be a Paragon early on, and so I kind of always have to make the Paragon choice now, whether I think that it's really the most interesting choice or not. You know, so they don't really like that. What they like is if there's a choice that maybe isn't so binary, you know, they don't really know what the consequences are going to be. It's not mapped to any specific point schedule, but then maybe like the characters around them react to them differently, or the world changes as a result in a way that they can't anticipate. Right? So they really kind of liked that. Sometimes games, you know, tie things to points in ways that make it so simplistic that players see right through it and they're just kind of insulted by it. Okay, so I mentioned this. Your first time is special. The fact, a lot of times when people do play a second time, that's when they choose evil, or to see what else happens. Sometimes they can't even play through evil on the second time through. They still default to good because they have such a hard time being bad. And also I should point out, they have no problem killing lots of things in the games, right? So they're not sort of going around kissing and hugging all of the enemies and saying, can't we all work it out? But the killing has to be justified, right? So they're saying, like being evil, for example, that would be killing for, no good reason, no justifications involved, right? Like you're just doing it for the pleasure of it. But good guys can kill, good guys, good girls can enact violence, but it has to be for a reason. There has to be a justification involved. And we did ask, I thought this was interesting, what do you think, like if you play as good, what do you think of people who play as evil in games? And the most interesting stories came out. People would say, well, I know, I don't judge anyone, like I don't think such and such is a bad person, but I think it says something about someone. We're like, what do you mean? And there was this real sense of like, well, I'm not gonna say that you're a bad person if you play as evil, but it says something. Like several people said those exact words to us. And if you go back to how people say, like, I play as me, right? Like these are just kind of my choices in this fanciful setting. Well then of course, if like I see someone else making all these evil choices and I play as me, I'm thinking, well, aren't they playing as them? So what is it saying about them? So they're not ready to commit and say like they are a bad person. But people are thinking about the consequences of these things, and they are kind of judging each other a little bit in relation to how they're making choices. So, a lot of what's going on, I think, is players are rehearsing their morality. They like to say they like choices, and game developers actually are a little upset that so many people play good, because they're like, we put so much energy into all these like evil storylines, and like evil quests, and nobody's playing them. Maybe on their second playthrough, but most people don't do that. So maybe we're just wasting our time. But I think people like having the choice so that they can reaffirm for themselves that they are a good person, taking the good choice. And sometimes they also like, if it's ambiguous, seeing what might happen. And then even feeling good about feeling terrible, right? It's like, oh, see, I am a good person because I felt bad about what happened. So, even though players find it difficult to play against type, there's something curious going on. So to kind of sum up, games give us these opportunities to play with, around and through boundaries and rules. So, like cheating and moral dilemmas both offer us these choices about, how we're going to play, and maybe we think about what kind of person we are. And most people end up staying within the bounds. Right? Most people don't like to cheat. They'll tell you that they really want to feel like they earned the achievement in a game. They really want that sense of accomplishment. They really want to feel like they earned it. And it's the same like with these choices. People want to feel like they're the good person. And they don't like to play evil. So I think that, going back to this concept of the magic circle, it's not this structured space where anything goes. We're bringing our sense of self into these worlds. We literally can't just easily discard them. The players, they would talk about, it was like some of them, for them, visceral discomfort trying to play evil. They just really did not want to cheat, right? So, it's their sense of self that they're carrying through. We're judging others for how they play. We do like to believe there's some difference. Obviously we like to play games. We like some structured spaces. But maybe just the idea is enough. We may not actually do all of those things like, oh, if only were a game, I could do this and this and this. We probably wouldn't, but we like the as if, the potential to. And with that, I'll end it. Thanks.
So now we have some time if you have questions or disagree or want to
Or if you
argue
play
or
evil,
whatever.
I'll hear from you.
I was just kind of interested in the magic circle.
Yep.
Is this something that's always been around, so to speak? Because when you talk about it as a boxing ring, I was just thinking cheat there too. People
Yeah.
are not, and their own personalities don't really care. Most people don't bite off somebody else's ear, you know.
Yeah, I mean, the magic circle is like a helpful concept, but you're right. Huizinga wrote about it in the 30s. He was a cultural sociologist, I think. And I mean, you're right, like, there's always been cheating in sports, in war, in love. Like, there's always been that. I think it's, sometimes the magic circle can be just like a useful fiction to sort of think through the what if. And we like the idea of some kind of boundary, but it's definitely not like an impermeable one. Like, we just can't box out daily or real life. Yeah.
Well, every game I've played, I haven't really been able to finish, but I'm surprised that more people don't play bad. Because, I mean, honestly, maybe that's why I never finished it, but I do enjoy being bad rather than good because it's the only time I can be bad, and I want to see how bad I can actually be. I mean, if I can just tear up the place, that's what I'm going to do, because in real life, it's not like I'm just going to, like, throw a grenade out here and stuff, you know, just blow up things or whatever, but I'm also surprised to hear that too, because, I mean, one of the games I play is Grand Theft Auto, though, and free play. I mean, you're just running around doing stuff. I mean, really, does everybody try to miss the people on the side of the street?
Probably not. Yeah. I mean, these are games like that. I think people enjoy sort of being bad in those games.
But whenever you're given a choice, like a literal choice where you can just, that's where people are going. Like, they're like, I'd rather be good. Or something.
It's, you know, and the people that we talked to who played as evil, you know, they really enjoyed it. And it was, like, for the reasons that you're saying. And the developers themselves are disappointed because they want, you know, they put a lot of work into doing those types of things.
It's so interesting, it seems like, just to see what the developers, you know, they chose to do. Back, the last game that I played a bad guy all the way through was actually a WWE game. But I was just a bad wrestler, you know. I did everything I possibly could to be bad, you know, still ended somewhere, but...
What I'd be curious to see is if they can figure out a way to make more people feel comfortable playing like the evil or the bad role, like what that would take, and then, you know, to see like how people respond to that. Because people ended up doing, even the good people ended up doing some bad things in the games, and they felt really terrible about it. But some of them also took some delight in doing some of those things.
It's a game.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you see developers trying to trick people into making what they think is a good choice and it turns out being bad?
Some of them try that, but then they, it's something that like only works once. You know, like if they set up a situation, you know, where you think you're doing one thing but you're really doing another. Like you can only kind of get away with that in the context of the game once. So any other choice after that, players are automatically suspicious of any information you're providing them. Yeah.
Does gender play a role?
Nope. I was curious about that, and women and men equally. You know, there are women who like to play evil, men who like to play evil, but then again, the majority of people were goody two-shoes. I mean, like I said, they like to enact violence, but they wanted it to be justified. Yeah.
How long does it take to make a game that's pretty good, I guess, like Dragon Age or something?
2 or 3 years. So they probably have at BioWare a couple hundred people working on the game. And you know, it'll start small with a small group of 20 or 30 doing pre-production, but then in production there's a couple hundred. And yeah, 2 to 3 years, depending on how long the game takes, technologies and all of that. And then, I mean, then they have whole other teams that are doing things like localization into different languages, testing, like QA and bugs and that kind of thing. So once you get into AAA, you know, it can be hundreds of people.
Is it hard to make a good game if you're not like a big company and stuff?
If you want to make a AAA game, yes. But I mean, indie games now, like, there are more and more people creating games either on their own or as small teams. So like Jason Rohr's games or Jonathan Blow, like single person can create a game that like, let's see, Papers, Please. Does anyone know Papers, Please? It's a small game. It won a bunch of awards a year ago. It was created basically by one guy, Lucas Pope. You play a border agent of like a fictional ex-Soviet country, and your job is like they've drafted you to be a border agent. You've got a family you've got to earn money for, and every day you have this line of people that you have to process, and the rules for who you let in and like what documents you ask for change every single day, and like you have to process people as fast as possible, and sometimes like you have to, like, people are like, please let me through, or you know, they're going to kill me, and if they don't have like the papers in order, do you reject them or do you let them through? And it's this really interesting game that basically makes you understand how systems like that work, because you end up doing terrible things. Like, there's no good way to play the game, and then you feel terrible about yourself as a person. Literally, like, try the game just for, you know, half an hour and you'll see what it's like. And it was made by one guy, so you know, it's totally possible. And I think it's become easier now with the tools that are available for a small group of people to make a game. It's mostly become about like getting the attention. Like, marketing has been like the big thing.
What was the name of that one?
Papers, Please.
Mia?
Yeah.
So, okay, so games can represent this magic circle. Would you say that the classroom in a university is a magic circle, where the rules are different than outside the classroom?
Yeah, there's a little bit. You know, like, you're sitting in rows and you're all facing me, and like there's you all agree to be like in a classroom, one person grades and the other people get graded, and you raise your hand in order to speak. So there could be some of that for them.
So then, do you think that is that conducive then to the magic circle effect when it comes to games that are used for teaching or learning, or does that overlap similar or useful, or do they conflict?
I don't know. I think there's the problem with like games in education, you know, and I think they can be used in that way, but part of the problem is that play has to be voluntary. And so once you tell people you have to play a game, something changes in how people approach it. And you're like, well, I don't know if it's going to be fun anymore if I have to play it. Like, if I play a game for homework, how does that change people's responses to the game? You know, in relation to cheating then, you know, people don't really want to cheat in regular video games. I would love to see a study of like how, like games in education, how are people cheating as much, less, more? Like, how are they approaching cheating, you know, when suddenly this game means something different? Yeah. So I think it's still something no one really knows for sure.
Yeah. I've used, I don't necessarily call them games, I call them simulations.
Mm-hmm.
And I've used them for many years in the classroom, but they're not designed to be a fun thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes they are. I teach in the College of Business, and so I have simulations where students are essentially running a company in competition with the other students in the classroom, and their grade is going to be somewhat affected by how well they compete with their classmates or against their classmates. And I've received some pretty interesting feedback on how students had breakthrough kind of experiences where they connected some of the dots that we weren't connecting as professors because of the simulation.
Yeah. Simulations are, I mean, one area where games are great because you have to understand how this system works on a deep level. Like SimCity, you know, like if you want your city to do well, you have to understand like the logics of the game and what it rewards and like what it punishes. There's this great game, you know, called Sweatshop. It's you play like the new manager of a sweatshop, and you're making like t-shirts and hats, and you know, you have goals that you have to meet in the game, like produce so many units over time, and you control the workers, and like you can hire more workers. You can hire like at one point like child workers because they're cheaper, You know, so like that increases your profit margins. You can increase the speed of the line to like increase production, but then the workers get tired more quickly. And like, because like the game is set up so that you want to try and, you know, gain production and be productive, and it's also a game like it's competition, like you want to get good at it, you can sort of understand the logics of like how sweatshops happen, you know, and like you find yourself, you're like, oh, I just employ children. This is why, you know, people do that. It doesn't make it right, but you suddenly understand like how the system has been constructed to have people make those choices. So yeah, I think they're great for that kind of thing. Yeah.
So I have actually a question related to linking education and games. So you were talking about cheating and that people cheat less in Facebook games. Do you know if it matters whether they cheat against somebody or they cheat in front of somebody? Meaning like, in fact, are they ashamed to cheat because their friends will know that they're cheating? Or they don't like to cheat because they will make their friends, they will put their friends in the worst condition if they are playing against their friends. And linking to the education, that would be whether this kind of, you know, research could be really useful to apply to the cheating in the classroom. And we also have two settings when we have on-campus students who know each other and online students who don't really know each other.
Right. People always tend to have an easier time cheating against strangers than against people they know. Like that will always be true because the strangers, there's like little to no repercussion. Like your reputation doesn't matter in that instance. With Facebook games, I think a lot of what happened is it's not that like if I cheat, nobody else is worse off as a result. Like the games so often are not a competition, so it doesn't matter. Like if I see my mother cheating in a game, I'm like, you know, so what? Like it doesn't make my farm worse because like she bought something, right? So like I think that has changed with the Facebook games. But in terms of, I don't know, like education, it may be different, you know, like if people know that they're being judged and sometimes it's relative to other people, you know, like if like, for example, in college, if you're grading on a curve, how I do does matter to how you do, you know, because those grades are going to be stacked against each other. So in that case, you know, how they're thinking about it is going to be very different from like the Facebook game stuff. The Facebook game stuff, like a lot of times people just were like, oh, these are games that don't really matter anyway. It was much more like, this is a diversion, it's a fun way to pass time. It's kind of like playing games on your phone. There wasn't a lot of investment, as opposed to more of the console and PC games where you're like, oh my god, like my choice really matters and I've invested 95 hours in this character, so I have to make the right choice. It's a totally different form of investment. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just a small follow-up. Do you know anything about the games where there are teams playing versus the games where you play individually against others? Do people cheat more in the when they're members of the team, so they kind of like help the team to cheat?
Some teams cheat. It's more of like a culture of, so then you'll find like teams that might cheat as opposed to teams that don't cheat. And you know, it would be hard to cheat on a team like if you're together and nobody else cheated, like everybody kind of has to have the same attitude for it to work.
You know, games are becoming more complex, multi-level, difficult to play,
Yeah.
etc. Like movies, cartoons, Hollywood movies, will they carry subliminal messages to affect the players?
I mean, most of the entertainment games, no. You know, I mean, you can talk about, all games have culture as part of them and, you know, cultural messages.
We're talking about that extra spread that goes into the film industry in order to send subliminal messages.
Not that I know.
No.
They either want you to buy the game or not. That's about it.
Okay.
Or spend more money on the game.
What about the product? But there is product placement in games, right?
Yeah, there's some product placement. So like some games like that run off a console, they can actually update ads in them in like real time. So like racing games and things like that. sometimes it's been limited, something like a Dragon Age or a Skyrim, it's really hard to advertise. What are you going to advertise, like an energy drink? Yeah. Yeah.
You talked earlier about some games that basically, like the sweatshop game and the Pages game, and it seems like this magic circle is like a very baited chalk line almost. Like you bring yourself into it.
Right.
Do you think that there is room for games that have more of a social message? I mean, you're putting yourself in this person's place, so you're getting invested in this person, and so that you're able to create compassion for certain types of people through that. Do you think that there is like a place in the gaming world, or even a market for those types of games?
Oh, sure. I mean, in a lot of these games, even if there's competition, you're still often part of a group that you're collaborating with. And so there's that opportunity to be social and to work together on things. There's also, do you know the game Journey?
I don't actually play the games.
It's a game for the PlayStation, and the developers who created it, they're called That Game Company. That's the name of their company. And they try and create games that evoke a certain emotion. And in this game, you're a traveler, and you just kind of move through this space. There's no dialogue or anything. It's all about the movement and the sound. And they wanted to create a multiplayer game where you couldn't be a jerk. And like part of the process was like, how would that be possible? Because people are so often just jerks to one another in these spaces. And it's a space where when you enter, and there are different like levels or areas, but when you enter, another player kind of enters too. And if your avatars are closer together, you can fly longer, and you can get up to certain spaces and like kind of collaborate on things. You can't communicate except like there are these chirps you can make. And if the other person goes off, like nothing bad happens to you, it just takes you a little longer. But they found like that people love that experience. Like people would actually help each other through things. Like people would play the game again and again because there was a way in the game you could see if somebody had played the game multiple times. But like that was a way that people really loved sort of being next to somebody else, and it because of the mechanics, people ended up like helping and collaborating with each other more because there was like no way to be a jerk to one another. It's really cool. Yeah.
Like with online games, is there like no way to get rid of people cheating? Because you can mess with code with.
There's really no way. I mean, game companies, they've got full-time staff working on it. And so like there are technologies that they're constantly using, and a lot of it is just community management and policing. But as soon as like the developers figure out like how to close one code hack, somebody else is trying to figure out another. So it's a constant cat and mouse game because for some people that's the game. Is trying to do that. It's trying to keep it managed enough that the majority of players are okay with the space. Because if the majority of people think that everybody is cheating, then the game just tanks and nobody wants to play it because it's totally unfair. But like if the player base knows, like they might know there's some cheating, but they know like the company is committed to stopping it, then that's okay.
You said that players start to see their not an avatar of themselves, but they start to see something of themselves in the avatar.
Yeah.
And that might inform some of the ethical decisions that they make in the game.
Right.
Is that a two-way street? Can we watch people play games and then infer things about the real life person?
It's harder to say. Like, I've asked people, do you think like there's a relationship between like if you cheat in a game and cheat in real life? And they're like, no, I'm a good person. Nick E. has done some interesting work on the Proteus effect. He has people take on an avatar in a virtual space, and I think it kind of looks like them, but it can be like taller or slightly better looking, and he has them negotiate or do something, and he finds that like if they're better looking or taller, like they negotiate better or they're more confident, and then they tested afterwards, and they found that this effect persisted in people after they played the game for a certain period of time. So it was like you could like go into this space and like practice these things and get better at them, and then leave the game and like be a little more confident or something. So some of that a little bit. But yeah, it's hard to say like one-to-one because, you know, again, these are situations that are fairly removed in terms of like an everyday experience.
So if that's the case, if it's hard to use decision-making in games to reflect upon a person, is that then a difficulty in using games in an educational environment where the decision they make might have been the correct one according to the rules of the game, but that doesn't imply that they would make that decision in real life, or that like does that same lack of two-way reasoning cause a problem in educational games?
Well, I think it depends on what you're looking for education to do. Like if you're interested in systems, then it's fine, because you're not like concerned about did they make the good or the evil choice. It's just they're understanding the system and how it worked in responses to it. If you're testing people's ethical or moral system, then that might be more of a problem. People used to say like it would be great to have a virtual world to study like how diseases travel and like vectors and like how people respond like to a plague. Like we could study this. It totally doesn't work, because like in real life, if there's a plague, we all run away. In a virtual world, if there's a plague, people are like, ah, ha, 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 like I touch you, and like everybody tags each other. It's like totally the opposite of like how you would normally behave. So for certain behaviors, they don't, like, you can't infer. Other things, like systems and stuff, you can.
Would you say GTA falls into that latter category?
Yeah, you know, I've run over people and stolen cars, and you know, it's just, you know, that's what the game asks you to do. You kind of know getting into it what you're supposed to do. It is interesting also then to talk to people just about like even in those types of games, what are the things that they absolutely will not do? Like lots of people absolutely will not shoot animals in games. People they're fine with. Dogs, not so much. Yeah,
Are there any other questions?
Yes.
Okay, another round of applause for Dr.
Thanks.
If you do have any other questions, you can stick around. Also, any students who need to sign in,